Thanks, Jeff. Over to David Garish.
Hi, I'm David Garish. I'm the energy manager for Queen's University. I'm coming to these switch meetings off and on for, I don't know how many years, 10 years, 15 years, something like that. Always great to meet the diverse group.
Thank you. And to David Lazell.
Yeah, I'm a emeritus professor at University of Calgary, and I suppose Queen's University as well. I was involved with Switch 15 or 20 years ago in the early years, and so just moved back to Kingston in the last few months. I've been involved in setting up and I'm now working with the Transition Accelerator, where I'm an energy systems architect, and so I'm interested in looking at how we get to net zero.
Thank you, David. Karen R.
I am Karen Rothlup, and I work for Lakeland Solutions. And my manager, Peter Ewald, he is a part of this group, and he wasn't able to attend today, so he asked me to attend and listen in. We are currently doing a feasibility study for an airport in this area, and so we wanted to find out information.
Thank you, Karen. Elaine Connell.
Is that me?
Yes.
Elaine? Okay, hi. Elaine Commel, a retired builder of passive house homes, passive house houses, and emphasis on the retired. Longtime member of Switch, and glad to be here.
Thank you, Elaine. To Tony De La Concha.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Tony De La Concha from Greenpoint Engineering. We do life cycle assessments, whole building life cycle assessments, and trying to do EPDs too for the construction industry. And I'm very happy to hear what the federal government is pushing through for this green movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. To Lucas Duchesne.
Hey there, Lucas Duchesne, the energy manager for CFB Kingston, also a part-time instructor at St. Lawrence College in the Energy Systems Engineering Technology program.
Thank you, Lucas. To Alain. Alain.
Yes, Alain Roy. I'm with Kingston Process Metallurgy in Kingston, and we also have the KPM Accelerate, so looking to help small business grow and all the accelerator aspect and financing.
Thanks, Alain. And people do feel free to say how you heard about Switch. It's always good to know. Atma Anantram.
Good morning. My name is Atma Anantram. I work for a company called Ameresco Canada. We are a clean tech integrator, and we have a division that also develops renewable energy assets. I heard about Switch through a former colleague. His name was Dave Seymour, who used to attend a lot of the events. So I joined the distribution list and do tune into the occasional meeting when the subject matter is of interest.
Thanks, Atma. Jack, excuse me, Jack Burkham.
Hi, good morning. I'm a financial advisor with Scotia Wealth, but I worked for Brookfield Renewable for 15 years as a senior person there, and in the US in the energy industry for 8 years before that. So lots of time in brown and green energy. And I've been a sort of just watching member of Switch for a long time, long before I moved back to Kingston a few years ago. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Well, Ken Dancer.
Yeah, Ken Dancer, Homestead Land Holdings, which is a high-rise residential rental owner and builder.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, Leslie Phillips.
I'm from the Kingston Regional Hospital Laundry. We've been a member of Switch on and off for about 15 years. And so we just have a solar panel project, and I would like to see what the new stuff is coming and see what the new requirements from the province is going to be.
Thanks, Leslie. Maria Maria, you might be on mute.
Hello. Yes, good morning. Sorry, just playing with technology here. Good morning, Rosie. Good morning, everyone. It's Maria Skordagi here, a member of the executive committee for Switch and scientific team leader at the Royal Military College, also an adjunct professor there. Looking forward to the presentation today as I lead a team that advises or recommends optimization of energy usage for the Department of National Defense, and we have several projects across the country. So this definitely the information today, I look forward to it, and I guess we can always look for ways to optimize how our government uses alternate source of energy and so forth. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Megan Corbett.
Hi, everyone. I'm an energy engineering intern with Queen's University, so I work with Dave Garish and Nathan Splinter here. So I'm relatively new to all this, being an intern, but excited to be here.
Welcome, Megan. Mike.
Hi, I was a former student director at Switch back in 2010. I'm now part of Toronto Hydro's climate action team. I just started that, so our goal is to get everyone to net zero by 2040. So I'm also very interested to hear about this presentation, see how we can help the city of Toronto.
Oh, welcome, Mike. That's great. Nathan Splinter.
Good morning, everyone. Nathan Splinter, Manager of Energy Sustainability, the central heating plant at Queen's University. So my team is involved with all of the energy efficiency projects, energy conservation, and utilities at the university.
Thanks, Nathan. Neil Chisholm.
I am with Kingston Process Metallurgy. We're an integrated chemical technology development firm in Kingston, Ontario. I'm an analyst with our techno-economic group, and I'm excited to learn a bit more about kind of the resources and funding landscape out there.
Great. Soren Christensen.
Hey, good morning. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Soren Christensen. I'm the project manager in the Climate Leadership Division at the City of Kingston. And I've had the pleasure of presenting to Switch before, actually, on the Better Homes Kingston program, which I manage, home energy retrofit program that we've had here. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. And yeah, looking forward to today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Soren. And Devin Lake.
Good morning, Devin Lake with Greer Galloway Consulting Engineers. We have a broad range of services here at Greer Galloway, but I'm a mechanical engineer. I like to focus on energy efficiency. I'm also a certified energy manager, so getting into energy management as well.
Great, welcome, Devin. Have I missed anybody? Okay, looking good. All right. Thanks very much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And there will be time from about 9:30 onward. We'll keep the line open, and so if there's someone you want to talk with more, you can talk with them then, or you can even side chat them if it doesn't distract you from the speaker. We want to Switch wants to thank new and renewing members since the beginning of this month. Large institutional member St. Lawrence College has renewed. We really appreciate that. Small corporate member QSBR Innovations, Robert Stinson is our usual representative from there, has renewed. A small nonprofit, the Belleville Emmanuel Residences, has renewed, and also an individual member here with us today, Devin Lake. Thank you for renewing. So to move on to our speaker today, word pictures matter, and we're going to talk a bit about financial instruments today, and my own work touches quite a lot on research tax credit. And actually, people don't like the word tax, and the research tax credit discourse can even be a little bit dry. It's sort of like being in a desert with some boulders scattered around, and some of those boulders have, big containers of doubloons underneath them, and some of them have rattlesnakes underneath them. I try to encourage people to think of it as tax money coming in, not tax money going out. But it is a topic that can be hard to talk about. So when I heard Andrew used the expression land rush about this present supply of financial instruments. I was pretty excited. I had pictures in my head of lush landscapes with horses with homesteaders on them galloping across the line, and that was great. So I was really appreciative what Andrew said he would talk with us today. So as you've seen from the promotion, Andrew is a partner, tax and legal at Deloitte, and before that he had been executive vice president and then the chief executive officer at Easley, which he transformed from a $9 million company to a $100 million organization and cemented the company reputation as a go-to brand in government and asset lending. He accomplished that following his vision to change the way companies think about and use research tax credit, SR&ED in Canada, grant and investment tax credit funds, and helping to accelerate funding to provide better cash flow and additional working capital. His past involvements also include InView, country manager for Canada, BDM, sales operation, business development and marketing, and TELUS, business to business sales. So we really appreciate having you here today, Andrew. I'm going to let you go ahead and tell us what you're going to talk about and then talk to us. So thanks very much. And thanks for the great word pictures.
Thank you, Rosie. You painted quite a picture there too. I haven't prepared enough remarks to stick with the Western theme, so I'm just gonna go with what I had planned to say. One other bit of my history that kind of connects me to a few people on the call. I was a managing director at Ecosystem, which is an ESCO or energy like deep retrofit company, for almost 5 years, and so that plus the tax credit and financial knowledge has become useful and interesting in ways that I didn't anticipate. I wish I could say I planned it, but the way that the winds are blowing, decarbonization, clean technology, and natural resources are kind of converging around a like a change in how Canada's economy is going to work, and ideally a change in our place in the world. And so we'll go through a bunch of stuff, like very specific, granular, dry as the desert tax stuff for sure. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the overall landscape. And I think for a group like this, where we're primarily concerned about reducing carbon emissions or reaching net zero goals, things of that nature, basically fighting climate change for the good of Canadians or the folks of Kingston or humanity, depending on how you want to put it. It's important to realize that the government's role in this, despite their packaging around climate goals, is actually economic stimulus. So when you ask yourself, like, why does the program look like this, or why does it work like this, or why is it that sector and not this sector? The answer is usually because we're trying to create GDP and we're trying to create jobs, and we're trying to improve our balance of trade, and things that themselves are not directly connected to clean technology or climate change. It happens to be the big bet of the moment. And this government is betting that that's about a 50-year thing. A good example is the fact that Canada punches way above our weight in nuclear energy. For a country of 30 million people, we're a powerhouse, pun vigorously intended. Another sort of example that inspires a lot of pride is aerospace. Again, for a country of 30 million people, we have a role in that place in the world that exceeds what you would think. And so Canada, because of our natural resources base and because of our innovation economy, wants to transform itself into a clean technology powerhouse. And so much of the stimulus is designed towards creating clean technology solutions and a clean technology industry, while at the same time adopting clean technologies, cleaning up our own emissions, and becoming a world leader in that space. Those two things go hand in glove. So where are we right now? In the last 2 years, we went from a couple of grant programs, and no major sort of global landscape around government incentives to fall economic statement 2022, when Canada rolled out what looked like sort of an interesting and a little bit ambitious plan with a few new tax credits. And between then and the budget in March, the United States launched the Inflation Reduction Act, and it came faster and was more comprehensive than anticipated. That in turn put some pressure on Canada, who created what ended up being a much bigger and more comprehensive funding package than they had foreshadowed. I'm certainly not connected enough to know if this was always going to happen. They would probably like us to think that. But then in budget 2023, we got quite a lot more than we were expecting. So I think, you know, I'll go through a little bit about what we have in Canada, then give you a bit of a, like, sort of a short summary of how it compares to Europe and the Inflation Reduction Act, just, you know, out of interest. So basically, Canada, on the pyramid on the right, this is directly lifted from the budget. Canada has 4 tiers of different funding programs that are designed to stimulate the clean tech economy and decarbonize the country. The green bubbles are billions of dollars committed in the last budget, and the time scale is about 10 years. So you're looking at that right. Investment tax credits, Canada has committed to $72 billion over the next 10 years in new tax programs that are basically directly funded by taxpayers. The tax programs themselves are listed on the right. I'll get to that in 2 slides and we'll go through them in detail. That's kind of the new and meaty stuff. There's also $35 billion in strategic finance. So the 2 major aspects there are Canada Infrastructure Bank, who will lend some of you money at $0 or 0 interest. I'm looking at Queens and Kingston Regional Hospital, City of Kingston, and others, what they hope will be better than average rates, and that's for profit companies. There isn't really a precedent for CIB investing in for-profit companies at 0%. But nevertheless, I think a lot of people think loan, what's the point of a loan? It's repayable. I can get money elsewhere. If the interest rate is low enough and the time scale is long enough, which it tends to be, some of the financial people on this call will understand that that's actually like a grant. Because of the time value of money, a fully repayable loan at 0% is essentially free money for an entity that has sort of a stable balance sheet. So this type of stimulus is hugely important. The other vehicle that was created under the Canada Growth Fund, a newly formed organization, is called a Contract for Difference. And so essentially, Canada, one of the major sources of our emissions is natural resources, particularly oil and gas. We have emerging technology in carbon capture that would enable us to partially decarbonize the process of extracting fossil fuels and turning them into fuels that we can use. And that requires us to capture the carbon and do something with it. The economics of that suck. There is no reason why a publicly traded oil and gas company financially would say to themselves, I'm going to capture this carbon. The only reason that exists in our regulatory framework before the budget is a carbon tax, which doesn't affect them on the use of the product. It only affects them on the process. So to put it another way, Exxon is paying for a carbon tax on fossil fuels extraction process. You are paying the carbon tax on gasoline in your car. And that stick is not sufficient to create a payback or an economic model on carbon capture. So what they've done is they've created a steep ramp in carbon tax to put pressure on the industry. And the industry responded and said, okay, fair enough. But it's like 30 years for us to break even on that. And that requires us still to believe that you won't change your rules, meaning it'll always be a left-leaning, green-friendly government that will continue to impose a carbon tax. When, you know, all of us who live here on planet Earth know that a conservative government would wipe that out probably on the first day in office. So what the Contract for Difference is, it's a financial vehicle that says, okay, we're gonna get behind this project. We're gonna provide you financial incentives that come from somewhere else. And if the carbon tax changes in such a way that the financial model driving this project tips over the line, we'll just pay you the difference. So literally, it's a contract to pay the difference in the cost of carbon to the company doing the project. This is a very long-winded explanation, but this type of financial product, which almost feels like insurance, is direct stimulus to answer questions about whether these projects are going to be economically viable. And because, like it or not, oil and gas companies contribute a lot to Canada's economy and swing a bit in lobbying circles, we needed to have an answer for this. Interestingly enough, though, there's a world where none of those contracts ever have to pay out. So there's quite a lot of money set aside for what amounts to like a maybe that we simply had to answer in order to get oil and gas companies interested in doing this. And so lastly, up at the top, the $5 billion into those programs is new money. So for instance, Strategic Innovation Fund already had been funded something like $7 billion over the last 5 to 10 years. The $5 billion going into those 4 buckets is new money in the last budget. So taken together, you've got over $110 billion. And that tracks with the proportion of GDP that is supposed to be invested by a Western economy in order to hit their climate goals. So the numbers are sort of purpose-driven to meet that standard agreed upon by global economists. And they also happen to be roughly 1/10 of what the United States is doing. And as we often use a sort of a wet thumb in the wind estimate, we're about a tenth the size. So all of this taken together tracks, if I can put it that way. So what is Canada doing? I talked about strategic finance because I think that's probably the least well understood. We also have tax programs, which I'll cover in detail shortly, and we have grant programs. Grant programs give you quote unquote free money. It's not free because it binds you to do a thing that you wouldn't have otherwise done. The tax programs offer you refundable tax credits in our case. And the contracts for difference in strategic finance offer you loan or basically insurance products to stimulate the types of projects that we all know we want to do. I think the bottom tier in pollution pricing is going to be the next wave, but we won't cover that in detail today. The United States, in the Inflation Reduction Act, has all the things we have at roughly 10 times more, covers significantly more sectors, including things like biofuels that Canada didn't touch, and also offers something called an output tax credit. So Canada is offering investment tax credits, which means if I buy a thing that qualifies and I file my taxes, I get a credit, a refundable credit back. An output tax credit means if I make a thing, I get a tax credit for how much of it I made. So using a specific example, we have a tax credit coming for hydrogen. If I build a factory and buy a bunch of machines to make hydrogen, I take the value of those assets, file it on my tax return, and I get a refund. In the United States, I also get paid for the hydrogen that I make. So they have sort of gone with the belt and suspenders approach. What it amounts to is a more comprehensive coverage of the affected industries. And in my opinion, probably does a better job supporting the most successful entrants in some of the like needed spaces. Electricity generation works the same way. I get a credit on the solar panels and I get a credit for the solar energy that I export to the grid. So that having been said, we're offering proportionally the same total amount of money. So Canada is banking on a larger number investing in their capital assets. The United States is more densely supporting proportionally a smaller number of companies on both the input and output side. Lastly, there's the EU has something called the Green Deal. their comprehensive stimulus package is exclusively grants. I think they would like to have tax programs, though I don't have any contacts there telling me that. But I can see that it would be very complicated in different tax regimes across the EU to agree on a common set of things that equally stimulate all the member countries when they have different tax codes that were created in different ways under different legal systems. So individual countries may still have and develop tax programs. The EU is offering only grants. Much easier for them to evaluate what you're going to do and write you a check than to try and get embedded with the tax system in Belgium and Greece and everywhere else. So in terms of policy, I mentioned before, there's like major economic drivers that are doing most of this. There's also geopolitical competition. So you would have read that the EU was upset that the Inflation Reduction Act was, in their words, so protectionist. What that basically means is everybody is creating stimulus to get companies to do their projects within their own borders. And so in that way, among our friends, we're in competition to create a superior clean tech and green economy. And I don't think there's any escaping that. My personal opinion, not that that really matters, is competition is a good thing. And if it forces the governments to pony up more and support these sectors more vigorously than they otherwise would have, then that's a win for all of us. But nevertheless, there is some tension around this stuff. And you'll hear of large renewable projects that depend on foreign direct investment from overseas to put wind farms and large solar generation projects in Canada. These programs are specifically designed for that. Choose us rather than choose them. And so there will always be sort of that tension between governments. So couple of sort of overarching goals. If you read the budget, and sorry, I suffered alongside you if you did, tough read. One of the things they talk about is building a national clean electric grid, and they liken it to like gigantic public infrastructure like railways and internet and things like that. And so what we're kind of saying under that is, if we move off fossil fuels, we need tons of electricity. And if we need tons of electricity, we need it to be generally available and very clean. And that in itself is very expensive. So principles of energy efficiency dictate we need to reduce demand and everybody needs to be more efficient. But this particular policy tentpole is about making sure we have enough supply. And for that reason, nuclear is considered clean tech. So they're getting all the same stimulus, no matter what your opinion is of nuclear. The simple reality is there's not really a path forward for Canada to generate enough electricity without nuclear, given the landscape that we have today. So they're very much part of this package. And then the other thing is they've covered end-to-end clean technology. And what I mean by that is critical minerals that eventually get turned into things like batteries are equally a part of this strategy. And so there's natural resources extraction all the way to finished goods, all the way to those goods being employed by businesses to reduce their emissions end to end. And the stated goal is decarbonization and global competition, as I mentioned before. So this is my last eye chart directly from the budget, and it'll be a little more Spartan. So where do they actually put all that stuff? We're now just in Canada. So the graphic you have here shows the new initiatives in yellow and the places they're trying to stimulate. In the facilities and equipment at the bottom, NRC is actually governing the ITCs. So when you're getting a tax credit to put a heat pump into a building, NRC is defining what expenses are part of a heat pump. And they're defining what type of heat pump ought to be eligible, working in partnership with the CRA, which then turns into legislative amendments. So in R&D, another huge platform for Canadian investment, government investment in business historically, some of you may be familiar with IRAP. the Industrial Research Assistance Program, basically pays salaries for companies to develop commercial technology of that has the potential to create revenues and jobs. This company, Canada Innovation Corporation, was formed and immediately subsumed IRAP and then funded to a much greater extent in order that some of these research projects can be done up to, well, it's funny how they put it. They say up to $5 million, but we'd consider projects up to 20, but definitely not more than 50. So it's not really clear exactly how that's going to work yet. IRAP historically can do projects up to 5. They're saying out loud, we want projects closer to $20 million. But then also there's a more hard cap of projects of $50 million. So what does that really signal? It signals the government is getting behind larger scale R&D projects, focusing less on startups and sort of organic technology development and more on projects that might be done by larger organizations, and acknowledging that the ticket has to be a bit bigger. And then lastly, the Canada Growth Fund, which is the entity that houses that contract for difference that I mentioned. The stated goal of the Canada Growth Fund is to provide strategic financing to projects that wouldn't otherwise get done that offer decarbonization and environmental benefits. So they will do different types of loan and other financial instruments beside the contract for difference. But important to sort of zoom out and say, okay, so they have a couple $2 billion. And we know that the carbon capture projects in the oil patch that we need alone are going to cost a couple $2 billion. So their mandate is one thing, but in reality, I think most of that money is going to go into that initiative. And, obviously we all benefit if we can clean up the oil patch, and less towards programs that the average project could apply to. Again, that's interpretation, not sort of a stated thing. So on to the new tax credits. Hopefully you're all still awake. This is where it's going to get a little bit more detailed. So the government announced in the budget 5 new tax credit programs. The ones circled in red are on the 1 yard line, and they're going to punch it into the end zone in the November legislative session, we think. So taking them together, we're investing in the electric grid. We're investing in decarbonization initiatives for business. We're investing in the clean tech manufacturing base. And separately, we're investing in hydrogen specifically. And we're investing in these same carbon capture projects that I talked about before. So taken one at a time, the clean technology investment tax credit in the middle is a refundable tax credit for installation of specific clean technologies in asset class 43.1 in the tax code. Won't go in any more detail other than to say heat pumps and the air source, ground source, geothermal, geo-exchange, VRF, anything you would normally think of as a heat pump, provided it's electricity, is in. Renewable generation is in, battery storage is in, and thermal storage is in. They also mention nuclear, and they mention things like flywheels. If you have a cool flywheel project, I would love to hear about it. I think this is mostly going to be wind, solar, and heat pumps. And so eligibility and how that program works, I'm going to cover in detail on the next slide. I think this is the tax credit program most of you are most interested in. The carbon capture project or program offers refundable tax credits as well. You have to apply and get approved before you start the project, and then you can earn the tax credit post-expense. It's going to probably fund about 20 or 30 gigantic projects, whereas the clean tech one, the first one we talked about, is probably going to fund about 10,000 heat pumps. So even though they're roughly the same amount of money or similar amounts of money, one is a small number of giant projects. The other is a larger number of smaller projects. Carbon capture, the tax credit requires you to sequester the carbon in the ground. So there's more than one viable carbon capture technology. And as they become proven commercially for the use that Canada's after here, which is decarbonizing the oil patch. Others may be added, but right now only carbon capture and geological sequestration and carbon capture in cement are eligible. Clean electricity is a tax credit for renewable energy generation and includes transmission between provinces. That tax credit program is specifically geared towards the public sector and utilities. It's fully refundable at 15%, and you don't have to be a taxpayer. Kingston Regional Hospital Laundry and your solar panel project, you can get this. If you do a bunch of things that I'll explain on the next slide, you could get the larger tax credit, but it might not be worth it to you. Same goes for Queens. I would say if you're doing, a couple solar panels and you don't want to have to change your life, you can get 15%. If you're doing a very large project with a lot of eligibility, you want to change your structure for the other tax program and get the 30%. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Also worth noting, clean electricity doesn't include thermal. It's only electricity generation. So we and others have lobbied on behalf of industry to say, hey, government, you're excluding non-taxpayers from any type of thermal decarbonization project. Did you actually need to do that? Clean hydrogen is for hydrogen manufacture, and it's a sliding scale according to the carbon density of the hydrogen that you plan to produce. And clean technology manufacturing, very poorly defined so far, but generally speaking, if you make something that's classified as clean tech, the capital assets that go into manufacture are eligible for the tax credit. So the long and the short of it is, we have draft legislation for clean tech and carbon capture. Representations have already been taken in, and legislation is going to become final this year. Hydrogen, I'm told, is close to having draft legislation created. Clean tech manufacturing, no word on it. We know it's coming. Nobody's said anything about when. Clean electricity is going to be outlined in greater detail in budget 2024. So March 2024, we get more info of clean electricity. Clean tech and carbon capture should be done by then. Clean hydrogen may be in between those two dates. Clean tech manufacturing after budget 2024, we think. So drilling down into clean tech, what do you need to know? Number one, you have to be a taxable Canadian corporation to take in the refund. I will explain using an example from a major Canadian university on the next slide. But the gist of it is, if you're not a taxpayer, meaning you're a pension fund who owns a bunch of real estate, you're a REIT, or you're a public institution like a university or a hospital, the way that you do this is you create a taxable subsidiary, and that subsidiary owns the assets. That subsidiary then applies for the tax credit. Tax refund flows into that sub, but the tax refund can't then be flowed up to the non-taxable. So you have to use it. So Amoresco guy is going to like this. Queens maybe is going to like this. If you create a taxable sub for the purposes of taking in government funding, and you can use the proceeds to do more sustainability projects, you can get more runway out of your same energy project budget. If I spend my $50 million and say 30 million is eligible, I'm getting a $9 million tax refund that I have to use in that same sub. And what is that $9 million going to be for? Maybe it's the next heat pump, but maybe it's something that you never have enough money to do, like building envelope or something like that. Obviously, your own organizations will figure that out. But if the project is of a certain scale, like this is game-changing money. Like you're going to do it. And there's certainly a precedent for that being done in other public institutions. We're not advocating for like maverick behavior or anything. The second major piece is limited partnerships. So I could do an hour on this for tax people, but the gist of it is a limited partnership is an entity that doesn't itself pay any tax. It takes in revenues and then it hands it off to the partners pay their own tax according to whatever rules they're subject to. So that's extremely common in real estate, extremely common in large scale infrastructure projects, in renewable generations. The project co is a limited partnership. So what happens is the tax credit is calculated at the partnership level. And so we decide the bucket is $100, and then it flows through to the limited partners, which is the investors basically, according to a set of rules, tax principles governed by what's called the at-risk amount. If you really want to talk about that, call me. It's very much just tax stuff. And there's a rule that says the general partner can take on any additional tax credit that doesn't flow through to the limited partners. So what you're going to find a lot in real estate is the limited partnership owns a building or some buildings. The limited partners are OMERS, Oxford Properties, a REIT. None of them can actually take in this tax credit. So what do? They either create the same taxable sub to own the energy assets, like I was saying before, or it all goes to a general partner. And so this type of structuring consideration on these first two bullets is going to create an industry. One industry is going to be large-scale energy projects and ESCO type projects and how to maximize government funding and recycle as much as possible within the project. And another is going to be managed services. So it may be instead of buying geothermal, you buy a managed service for geothermal, and that company takes in the tax credit but passes on the savings to you. This is an operating model that exists already, where if you buy the geothermal from that company, you don't have to worry about getting your own tax credit. You just have to make sure that when you negotiate the monthly price, that it's transparent from this government program, and it's not all being kept by this other company. So emerging landscape, very interesting. That type of stuff is basically what I do all day. The transfer rules. So the tax credit is a rule that says if you sell the asset to an arm's length entity, meaning it's not all in the family, the remaining value, which is again defined by a bunch of tax stuff, becomes a tax liability for the seller. This is not a great rule for real estate where people sell buildings more or less for a living. The amount is trivial. The cost of a heat pump next to the sale price of the building the heat pump is in is generally not going to be transformational, but it's a pain in the neck. And we're not trying to create pains in the neck. We're trying to get people to do this. So this is another area where we've we've made representations to government. And many associations have as well, because it looks like it's not going to work the way that they thought it would work. That having been said, probably not going to change because it works perfectly the way they wanted to for carbon capture. And so one scenario that you might think of that you don't have to worry about is, say your homestead land holdings, and I have a build co and an operate co. Build co builds the building, and maybe they run it for like 6 months or a year. And then they transfer ownership to operate co. And so in that case, build co might actually become eligible for the tax credit. Are they going to trigger recapture or transfer rules? The answer is no, because they're considered non-arm's length entities, or if you prefer, that's all in the family. So the rules are very tricky for like sale of the assets, but not very tricky for operating in the sort of standard construction and operation model that a lot of developers who then own the buildings would traditionally have. Last thing you need to know, there's a labor condition. So for the majority of these tax programs, the only exception that they've mentioned is heat pumps or HVAC related stuff. Everything else, particularly renewable generation, battery storage, etc., you have a choice. You can either elect to claim 30%, in which case you're subject to the condition, or you can just claim 20% and not worry about it. The difference between 20 and 30% on a very large project is tens of millions of dollars. People are going to want the 30%. The 30% obligates you to make sure that covered workers which is a defined term that basically means physical laborers and trades, are paid the prevailing wage, which is a defined term that basically means the most recently collectively bargained union contract for that work in that jurisdiction, on an eligible work site, which basically means wherever this project is being done. And so what's weird is when you buy a solar system for like the rooftop of your apartment building, you're usually going to get, it's going to cost $1 million, or you're going to get 800,000 labor, or 800,000 material, 200,000 labor. What you're not going to get is Jane is paid $28 an hour, John is paid $23 an hour. Here's their benefits, and here's why it matches the, you know, closest electrical union to solar installers in Northern Ontario, which is the level of detail that you're expected to go find and have in order to claim this 30%. So this is a major burden for the taxpayer. And what I think is going to happen, and what I would advise you to do if you're someone like Queens who has a lot of purchasing power, is take the labor condition, put it directly in your RFP, and make the bidders explain how they're going to prove it to you. All it really requires is a ton of transparency. There's no new information. There's no new, like they might have to pay people a little bit more, which is the point. There's no new sort of machinations or things they have to do except for a little bit of signage. What's different is the level of disclosure is like vastly more than is customary. So if I'm doing $100 million solar project where it's 100% eligible, I can either get a $20 million tax credit or a $30 million tax credit. For $10 million, I'm going to make sure that my contractors meet this condition. So if anybody's sort of rolling their eyes and like, I don't know if this is worth it, what I would say is 10% of the project cost worth the pain in the neck? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Kingston Regional Hospital Laundry, one solar installation, you might say, it's already almost finished. There's no way we're going to do this. On the flip side, you know, we have a client who's a potato factory that is using their land for a $400 million wind farm. For them, the 10% it's a no-brainer. They would jump through a lot of hoops. And everybody else is probably going to be somewhere in between those two things, and you just have to decide and then get your head around how you're going to prove it. My advice to people who have started doing something and they're not sure what they're going to do is to figure out what detail you have, get as much information as you can conveniently get, and save it. Because you're not going to make this application until at least the end of your fiscal 24. And enough time will have passed that you may have a hard time gathering data then rather than gathering it now. So keep your receipts. Another thing I meant to mention before, Clean Tech, which is the program we're talking about now, is eligible for projects that are finished, like in and working, turbine spinning, electricity exported to the grid from budget day 2023. So stuff that you started years ago that hasn't been finished, but you've been working on continuously, is eligible. Anything that you finished before March 9th, 2023, not eligible. So a lot of the organizations on the call today have work going on that is eligible and may be finished before the end of your next tax year. So high degree of relevance. Also worth noting, the labor condition looks like it's going to apply to all the tax programs. It is a uniquely Canadian way to do this, but there is a labor condition in the Green Deal in Europe and in the IRA in the States. And the reason for it is when we create all these jobs by stimulating this economy, we don't want to race to the bottom on labor costs. We want to create the types of jobs that create, you know, a strong middle class, basically. Standard government policy objectives. This particular condition, as I just explained it, is currently under review. Representations were due September 8th. Government was to tell us what was going to happen September 30th. They came back on September 30th and said, we need until Halloween on the labor condition. So I'm not sure what's going to change, but I am sure that it's not going away because of the sort of international agreement that protecting the jobs of the people doing this work is important enough to put it into the programs. So more to come on that, probably in early November. So let's talk about an example. One of the most interesting aspects to me is how do I get more than one thing out of this? So let's say I am a large Ontario university with a district system, and I cook up $190 million geothermal and heat pump retrofit project that includes my existing central plant and maybe some distributed assets. CIB might be willing to give you 50% of that on a zero interest loan, which, as I discussed before, is essentially free. They would require that you create a taxable sub. And the reason is that for CIB to get behind your project, you have to generate revenue. And the whole point of it is to decarbonize. So your taxable sub then is going to own this new set of energy assets. And then they're going to sell the product of that to the institution at a price that is governed by a whole host of tax concepts, generally called transfer pricing. The rule basically says you can't sell it for like a buck. It has to be commercially reasonable. You can't create an artificial tax shelter, but you also don't have to charge exactly what the market rate is or as much as possible or anything like that. So we create the taxable sub, and we immediately create a requirement to bill ourselves and create tax. Then we get $95 million. So right there, it's worth it. The other interesting thing is with the $95 million and the money that we're getting from other sources, we're buying a thing that depreciates extremely quickly for an entity that presently earns no revenue. So what happens, and anybody who wants it in a separate meeting, is you create a long-term tax shield by creating tax credits that you can carry forward. Short version, this company's not paying any tax no matter what they sell the electricity or the heat for quite a long time, even without tax credit or anything like that. And this set of principles is decades old. What's the second benefit? Well, by creating this taxable sub, which I had to do to get the CIB money, I'm also getting a tax credit. In this case, you're going to have to trust me that the amount is $27 million. It's 30% of the unfunded portion. And so presto, I got my 95 million. It gave me access to my tax credit because now I'm a tax paying entity. And what else do I have to get? To get my $190 million project off the ground, I'm going to get 45 million from a bank, outside financing, not hard to achieve. And I need 50 million from my capital budget, which is reduced to 23 million because of the ITC. So now I've done all the math, and I'm sitting in the energy department's office, and I'm saying, I think I can do $190 million for $23 million and potentially totally decarbonize heating in a big section of what I do. I am not an energy manager. I'm not saying this is right for Queens, even though I'm being very tongue-in-cheek about it. The specifics are going to be different for every institution, but the principles of creating the taxable sub to take in a big zero interest government loan and then getting a follow-on tax benefit and that contributing to the financial model, that is happening already. This example is cribbed from the high-level details of a project that's already underway. So, don't fear the idea. The specifics are going to be up to your particular case. Now, the other obligations, aside from setting up the taxable sub, is that I'm now signing on to this labor condition to get the 30%. Again, we're talking tens of millions of dollars that no matter what we make sure that the installers are paid, the extra money is going to have been worth it. But in this case, it would only apply if my project also had something like batteries and solar panels. If it was just the heat pumps, we wouldn't even worry about it because it's exempt. And then lastly, I have work to do to create the company, to create the model between the public sector organization and the taxable sub under transfer pricing. That company has to file tax returns. So when I said before, basically, is the juice worth the squeeze? Transparently, for $27 million, you would do it in a heartbeat. But if I'm talking about putting one rooftop unit on, do I want all of this work? Maybe only if you're going to do this repeatedly. Like, for instance, for a portfolio of buildings, and my one entity is going to own all the solar panels for all 25 apartment buildings or something like that. But you could certainly be forgiven for saying the difference is 100K, and I'm agreeing to create a company that I'm going to have to operate for 20 years. Maybe you don't want to do that. And I think when you sit down and you think about your sustainability project and all the puts and takes and all the government funding available, you're going to know what the appropriate thing to do is. I'd also be remiss if I didn't say creating the energy co within the public sector or non-taxable or limited partnership also lends itself really well to accessing debt, because the debt is basically an investment in the success of that project. And so there are, like, the ESCO model kind of relies on this in energy performance. There are companies that you've heard of, like Efficiency Capital and Sofiac, who want to invest in the project but not be the engineer or the builder, or maybe they want to own assets on your behalf. All of these things work better if we're not talking about a handful of items owned by a gigantic corporation, but we are talking about something that has a fence around it, my little energy co. And so that model exists today for all kinds of reasons, but I think will become the predominant model for energy projects above a certain size. Certainly, it's what I would advise. So if we sort of zoom out of that specific example and the tax credit programs, I'll speak more generally about where do I think I can get government money. There's too many programs for us to talk about. The $100 billion in new money for decarbonization is one aspect of this. The R&D tax credit program that Rosie talked about is just as big by itself as all of these things together over the same period of time. There is so much money out there. So what do I have to do to qualify for that? This is me writing a summary level list that I think is most applicable to the audience. Number one, am I decarbonizing process or buildings? Meaning, if I'm a manufacturer, am I reducing emissions in what I make, or maybe food processing, that sort of thing? Or am I just replacing a boiler with a heat pump, doing renewable generation? That we've covered in detail. R&D is covered by this tax program that Rosie referred to, as well as some grant programs that are targeted towards specific outcomes, for instance, in AI, or for instance, believe it or not, specifically in fisheries. So all kinds of stuff out there if you're doing R&D. Development of new clean technologies, you would get all of the above. If you're creating a brand new way for zero carbon heating, we'll find you quite a lot of money from a few different sources. Building, expanding, and improving manufacturing. So basically what that amounts to is, are you creating new GDP and new jobs in the manufacturing base in Canada? If the answer is yes, and you're not making something abhorrent, then you're good. Doesn't have to be clean tech. It can be number two pencils. If the economics are right and they want that factory here, there's money. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage, we covered. Development of new clean resources. So we are working with a client who wants to take waste from dairy facilities, turn it into ethanol, and then turn that into sustainable aviation fuel, and then sell it to Canadian aviation companies. There's no tax program just for that, but there's a bunch of grant programs that really like the circular economy. They like that you're taking waste and you're turning it into something. There will soon, hopefully in the next 5 years, be specific biofuels programs. There's a ton of R&D money and things like that. And then there's the economic development stuff we talked about before. So in this field where you're making something and you're doing something with the waste, there's a novel sort of jigsaw puzzle of different ways to get projects like that funded, using not only government money, but also seeking equity and equity investors in debt from the private markets. These projects are really interesting. Implementing renewables and zero carbon energy we talked about. That's basically referring to the tax program we covered in the most detail here today. Raw materials supply chain to finished products. So critical minerals extraction, exploration, processing, shipping, the whole supply chain. Like we're talking about building facilities on the shores of the Great Lakes and buying boats to move things around, like not just the actual mine. There's stimulus money for that whole ecosystem. Economic development we talked about. And then lastly, any major capital project, there is a very poorly understood tax system. Basically what happens when you buy something is you have to tell the government what it is. So I'll use an example I use often. Let's say on my property, I erect a structure in the back lot, and that structure is 4 walls, a roof, and a door, and it's very cold, and it's got a bunch of meat in it. If I tell the government that's a building, I get to depreciate that over 25 years. So for my $1 million, I get a $40,000 tax credit every year. If I tell the government that same building is a refrigerator, I get to depreciate it in 7 years. So I'm getting about $146,000 in tax benefits every year until it's fully depreciated. And there is an art and a science in figuring out how to classify things, and also which expenses that went into creating them count. And this, for major capital projects, is a significant thing. Saves millions and millions of dollars for companies on large capital projects. And so it's not a grant, but if you're a tax-paying profitable business, any tax you don't pay is equivalent to bottom line revenue. So that is a general process that we call asset classification. So how do we do that? Basically, our department in Delloite is called Global Investment and Innovation Incentives. It basically means wherever government is coming to the table. So what we do is we look at the project rather than the program, and then we try to piece together the optimum way to fund it. Meaning, how much money can I get somebody else to contribute to doing this? And then we take it from planning through estimating what you're going to get where it's not certain, to applying to programs, and then in tax to doing what we call tax compliance work, which is basically making the application to the program through the tax system. And then reporting, verification, and in the case of tax, if necessary, audit. So rather than think of us as hiring an accountant, we would like you to think of us as hiring somebody to finance the project. And the simple reason is if you go one program at a time, you're limiting yourself for sure. It's not that it isn't great to get something from government. We all like getting something from government, but the goal should be to do more or to get as much as possible. These programs exist for you. And in some cases, you're entitled to the benefits. So important to make sure you get as much as you can. And I definitely went over my 20 minutes. So apologies for that, but I don't think I could have done this quickly and given you enough useful stuff. So maybe Darko or Rosie, if you want to ring the bell to wake everybody up, we can do questions if anybody has any.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I want to first just invite, there's a discourse going on in the chat. And maybe this is something that we can expand on. Mark Sibley says CCS deals in scope 1 but not scope 3, so I don't see it as a good bet. And David Lazelle responds, that is true, but if the CCS tax credit reduces the cost of low greenhouse gas carbon, it could open up the opportunity to use greenhouse gas hydrogen. It could open up the opportunity to use hydrogen as an end-use fuel. The challenge is that the companies receiving the CCS tax credit do not always, maybe ever, pass on the benefit to users of the hydrogen as a fuel rather than as a feedstock. Oh, and there's another message here. Okay. Okay, so is there anything that you'd like to comment on that discourse in the chat?
I mean, I think what I would say about that is in the next 30 years, I don't think the oil patch is going to stop doing any of the things that it's doing. So we either have them capture the carbon they're emitting or we don't. We don't really have a credible path forward to just turn it off. And so given the choice between capturing it and not capturing it for sure is better. It is a ton of money that government is pointing towards that, and we could point that towards anything we want. We could buy an aircraft carrier. And so, you know, the part that I think people find nauseating is that these companies already make plenty of money. But the cynical reality is corporations don't do things because they're the right things to do in most cases. They do things that help them achieve their business objectives. And so being realistic, I do believe carbon capture is an important thing to do. With respect to hydrogen, where hydrogen is manufactured, let's call it brown hydrogen. We'll just put it that way. They are also eligible if they capture the carbon in the hydrogen manufacture process to get both tax credits. And so there is sort of it's a bit half-baked because it's government doing this, tax people no less, but there's a way for hydrogen manufacturer, dirty hydrogen manufacturer, to clean itself up and still get the benefit of the tax programs. The output tax credit version, where we're also paying for the hydrogen that gets produced, like they do in the Inflation Reduction Act, could be super useful to maximizing the supply. And any sort of clean fuel subsidy for consumers would be super useful to increase adoption. And we don't have that. So that feels like the other shoe to drop. And I mean, unfortunately, I think the major linchpin is the next election. So we have to work in the political cycles rather than just continue to do the right thing. That's reality in our democracy. So if there's going to be something major there, I would see it happening, you know, in the first budget after the next election.
Just to ask Mark and David, does that respond to your question? Any further comments?
Well, I have one. I mean, I agree. Actually, Andrew, it's a fantastic presentation. I think on the hydrogen side, I think you've hit part of the problem right on the head. One of the big challenges we have, we've done a lot of work on trying to deploy a hydrogen economy in the Edmonton-Calgary corridor, and one of the big challenges there has been that you've got incentives for producing hydrogen. The CCS incentive, in order for it to be deployed in any effective way, we need to be talking about production of, say, on hydrogen production, which some of the big initiatives have already been in, making hydrogen from natural gas without carbon emissions by capturing and sequestering it. But it's in the 500 to 1,000 tons of hydrogen a day. And the hydrogen is being used to crack bitumen or make fertilizer or upgrade oil refineries. They're using it as an end-use fuel, where it could actually have a huge impact, but it would be a competition for diesel, essentially for heavy-duty trucks. The companies that are actually getting the tax credits, you know, in some ways I see it as a competition to their products, their scope 3 emissions, if you like, because, you know, it's going to take market share away from diesel. And so what they do is they add a premium to the price of moving hydrogen into that market. And so what we don't have is a value chain approach in our tax credit system. We have little pots of money to help buy hydrogen trucks. We have little pots of money to help put in hydrogen fueling stations. And you got this other incentives for the hydrogen production, a low carbon hydrogen production. The problem is none of them are coordinated. And so they don't actually get, the investments don't result in putting in a new value chain, which is what we need for a hydrogen economy. So it's just a challenge. I'm wondering if you got any comment. Do you see any signals that the government's, the IRA or in the big hydrogen hub projects, I think the big announcements are going to be this Friday for the United States, are, you know, there's a much better coordination within the American system in developing hydrogen hubs than in the Canadian system.
The only thing that I'm aware of that already exists or has been announced, actually it starts in January 2024, is the BC Clean Fuels tax. So in terms of being all encompassing, I wouldn't call it all encompassing so much as it gets to the last user, which then in turn should create the demand. And what they're doing there is they're saying, here's the tolerable amount of carbon in fuel. And so these people pay the regular carbon tax. Anybody with dirtier fuel pays more, and anybody with cleaner fuel pays less. And then they keep tightening it up.
Yeah.
So today's dirty fuel is tomorrow, or today's clean fuel is tomorrow's dirty fuel. And so that sort of takes the heat off government to pick winners, to like decide, are we doing hydrogen? Because government sucks at that. And so they're not even really trying to be good at it, thank God. But they have to wait for the market to sort of decide if hydrogen is going to be the next big thing. Like using the sustainable aviation fuel example, like if we can fly around the world carbon free based on the waste from our yogurt, like that's a winning proposition. We should make sure those guys get all the money. But we have to wait for those things to happen, and the planet is warming all the while. So it's really like, the snake is always eating its tail trying to figure these things out.
Okay. I just want to go to Tony's question. Excellent presentation, Tony says. And so are there any tax credits or grants for small to medium enterprises? Also, is software development included somewhere for grants and tax credits?
Yes and yes. So all the tax programs apply to anybody paying tax, or anybody who is eligible to pay tax. You can be in a loss position, you're still taxable. So all the stuff we talked about today, you're eligible for. In terms of targeted SME programs, there are some federal and lots of provincial programs around specific sectors. So for instance, there was a grant program that recently closed that's going to open again next year to decarbonize medium-sized manufacturing. And so they were doing projects from like $2 to $20 million. And they would fund things like energy managers and energy management software. It wasn't just the major sort of process type stuff. So without knowing your specific company, I'll say you're eligible for all the tax programs, regardless of size. And the grant programs, it's going to be a question of figuring out what your project is doing and where we can find it. But yes, and then software development, broadly speaking, well, actually, I'll be even more specific. Half of our business on the R&D tax credit comes from software development claims. So Rosie knows it well. The doubloons and the rattlesnakes, like, let's look under the rocks and figure out what you have. So do reach out to me offline. And if you're doing the right types of things in the right types of ways, you get a refund on the salaries of the people doing it. If you're doing the right types of things in the wrong types of ways, we'll teach you how to do it in the right types of ways. And if what you're doing is not R&D by the definition of the tax code, then I'll explain it to you. And you'll tell me if you have other things coming or whether, that's a miss. But that's, believe it or not, that was the short answer.
Thank you, Andrew. We typically go on at this point and do a round of sector news. But I do just want to take this opportunity to thank Andrew for this great presentation. Andrew, it was like water in the desert, and actually has inspired me to think of investment tax credits more like dessert, because they come at the end of them. Yeah. Really appreciate it. I love the eye charts too. And thanks for making these programs so vivid and showing us how they fit into the national and international context and our overall goal of keeping the planet livable. So after this meeting finishes, so we'll have the sector news, and then we will be keeping the Zoom meeting open for attendees who wish to network and seek further details from the presenter. Andrew, I think you're okay to hang with us till 10?
I am, yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm gonna try and make this send up some little clappy things. Let's see reactions, because I really appreciate the presentation. There we go. Clap, clap. Thanks, Andrew. So people have more questions for him, there'll be time, but let's go to sector news. So I'll first ask if people have any sector news about fuel cells. And please just unmute and sing out. Okay, nothing. Solar.
Can you, this is David Katz, I just joined. I'm the chair of Ontario Sustainable Energy Association. So sorry we came late, but we're having a Beyond Net Zero symposium and having the federal government there just explaining things as well. Just wanted to share that October 30th at OSEA.
Thanks very much, David. Great to have you here. And this is being recorded, as you know, so you can catch the rest of it if you need to. Bioenergy, any updates on bioenergy? Electric vehicles?
Well, I was at the Toronto Forum yesterday, and there was a big panel on electric vehicles, and Volkswagen were there, again, explaining the challenges we have relative to the IRA in the States. But we have the minerals and we can create the jobs. That was part of the message from the Toronto Global Forum. I think all the events were recorded and they'll be on their website.
Thank you. That's great, David. David, yeah, you're being asked, can you post a link to the symposium in the chat? That would be great. Okay, transportation. Wind energy. Geothermal. Water power. Education. Conservation. Green building.
Again, this is David. One of our talks is on the green building, and Green Globes has brought out a new program on net zero energy and net zero carbon to complement their other Green Globes things, and they're looking for pilot projects in Canada. So people contact me, I can see if we can get your building under the new program.
Great, thank you. Okay. Maybe you would have a link even for that, David, to put in the chat. Green Globe's new program. Collaborations. Any other sustainable energy issues we have updates on? All right. So our next meeting is November 3rd, 2023. And you will see our promos about the program for that day. And for now, I think I want to thank Darko very much for taking care of the technology. And again, thank you so much, Andrew Kareckas, for being our speaker today. And the floor is open. Go ahead and reach out if you have questions for Andrew or whatever. I will be here, but I won't be actively chairing anymore. Thank you all very much for coming.
Andrew, it's more of a comment than a question. I've worked in technology and industry, and I always thought that was complex. But tax issues and how to optimize what you do to get a project through most efficiently, that boggles my mind because it's complexity of our own making.
And they keep changing it. It's a living, I guess, right?
Andrew, I came late, so I have questions about the tax credit, the clean energy tax credit that is for ground source heat pumps.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that it's related to businesses or industries to facilitate, more production at lower growth. But is it also applicable to real estate, which is not a business? But I mean, the real estate owner is a business, but the condo isn't.
Yeah. So basically, the condos are kind of left out in the cold. But what has to happen is the capital asset, in this case, the geothermal field, well, pumps, etc. form one capital asset, and then they go on the books of some entity. When that entity files their taxes, that would be what triggers the refund if they apply to the program. And so a condo corp is non-taxable. But in the case of other institutions, what I went through this in detail, so do watch the recording, but basically you create a taxable sub just to own the stuff. And that's a viable and oft repeated way to do this type of thing. Condo corps, so what we want is property developers to build net zero condos. And that requires things like geothermal and heat pumps and maybe battery storage and all manner of other things that apply for the tax credit. But the condo corp and the developer, neither of them have a path to claim it. So a couple of associations we work with have, like, on behalf of the real estate industry, have made representations basically saying, come on, guys, what about all these apartment units people are going to be buying and living in? And I don't know if anything is going to change on that. I have my doubts because we're kind of at that point where they need to get something over the line. But we'll see in November when everything is finalized.
Okay, I'll check it out. Thank you. I think also we could have businesses formed like OSEA. We're a nonprofit, but our members could create that and sell it under a power purchase agreement as a business to the condo that's buying a service. So, and their pricing would be reflective of the fact that they got the tax credit to put it in under their building.
That's one path forward. I'm working with a company that basically offers managed geothermal. And the industry needs to evolve with enough competition that the tax credit is passed on in the form of lower monthly rates. Because right now there's not a lot of other competitors, and depending on, they can sort of choose how much of that money to keep for themselves. They're going to price it in the way that makes them as profitable as possible. And the best outcome, the most efficient outcome for government stimulus is that it goes to the people who made the choice to go zero carbon in the first place. So
my other question, unless there's other, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, I just had one more general question. Giving an example, you said about if you make number 2 pencils, is there some strategic maybe more like import duty strategy whereby, let's say, you are manufacturing something in Canada and you invest in lowering carbon footprint, and when that same product is being imported from another jurisdiction, from China maybe or something, where it created more carbon, emissions, to somehow level the playing field and to compensate or stimulate local producer based on their effort to reduce carbon emissions for the same product.
So all of the programs that reward you for decarbonization, in theory, should have that effect. Like, you should be spending less capital to build the same factory if it's clean than if it wasn't, or it should at least level the playing field. But as far as import tariffs and duties and things like that, there is a general consensus that dirty things are going to be taxed more as they cross borders in future. But that's Canada is going to be a member of whatever gets decided by bigger economies. Not to say we're not important, but we can't make ourselves uncompetitive or a lousy trading partner to countries 100 times bigger than we are. And so I think when that happens, we're kind of going to follow. And then as far as the carbon cost of making specific things, it doesn't, knowing that international framework doesn't yet exist, and therefore doing that to our companies wouldn't make them more competitive globally, would make them less competitive globally. We can't really afford to increase the cost number 2 pencil. And another way to put it is like we're like lemmings, right? Like until they all start running towards the cliff, we're going to be standing still with everybody else because otherwise we're the only guy who jumped, and that doesn't serve us. But I mean, that could be like how we maintain things after 2030 or 2050 as opposed to how we get there. It just seems to be it's a general sense that it seems to be moving too slowly to ladder up to those first set of goals.
Thanks.
David, one of the things I see very locally on my street is houses being built, new houses. They're tearing down old small houses and putting up McMansions, and they're building them in a way that's not designed for the future. They're building them with sort of conventional levels, meet minimum code, putting in natural gas furnaces, not putting in hookups for electric vehicles in the garages or whatever. For a small developer in a city like Kingston, are these tax changes that you're talking about going to change their behavior, or is this, like most of the examples you had were aimed at big projects, big institutions and so
on? I'd say probably not. Like I've talked to a number of developers and they're all like, how can I get this money? So it's created the right set of questions, but we don't have the right set of answers. The answer is you can't. So it relies on demand. So until human beings start buying houses according to how energy efficient or how close to net zero they are, the supply side isn't really motivated to do anything. But this is where when you go down the rabbit hole, another company I'm working with makes a micro CHP battery furnace combo platter that's basically designed to, when you have to use gas to heat, to store it in a battery, which then allows you to use a heat pump when you don't have to use gas to heat. So the effect is that it reduces peak demand in winter, which in turn allows for more efficient heating and cooling using the existing or even the future grid. And so government is behind this, utilities are behind this, Enbridge is behind this, because we can't switch from gas to electricity in one move. And so there are these types of solutions that in theory have a good payback for the homeowner. Like in a blackout, I have power for like 3 hours. I can keep running everything, not just the fridge. And that's a very human thing. But the reality is that also when it's minus 35, I've got a charged battery. Winter peaks are coming. We know that, right? And so there is like a environmental benefit to get people to buy natural gas burning furnaces if they have this sort of module. So I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm just saying there's like, it's a lot more complicated than what they do in the tax code, I think, to try and create those types of answers.
Well, I guess we can now wrap up things. I'll make sure that this is posted. So we have like past events on the website, and it'll just be a live link to the recording. So people, there was quite a interest in having recording posted.
So this is just on your switch.ca?
Yes.
Okay.
The same place where you saw the announcement of the upcoming events, there is a button, like past events and the list, and we have some backlog of recordings to post. I'll make sure that I clear that backlog soon.
For those in Ontario, we're rebuilding the Ontario Sustainable Energy Association now that renewables are back in the plan. Many of our members left the province in light of Premier Ford's cancellation of 700 contracts. So it's back, it's economic. And the next wave is the ones that want it, the next young generation. So other than, the old folks, we're trying to rebuild, and that's what our symposium is. I'm happy to collaborate with Switch and other organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So then we can stop recording and